America is no stranger to people that march to the beat of their own drum, experimenting with life, pushing boundaries in fields from science to culture and religion. The Public Universal Friend is one such maverick. In a time where women were not expected to have much of a life outside the home, let alone have religious opinions, and even less to travel around preaching those ideas, the Public Universal Friend exemplified the dream that anything is possible in America. The Public Universal Friend was born Jemima Wilkinson on November 29, 1752, to Jeremiah and Amy Wilkinson of Cumberland, Rhode Island. The Wilkinsons were Quakers, and Jemima grew up in the Church of Friends, attending the Smithfield Friends Meeting House, one of the oldest Quaker meetings in America, originally constructed in 1718. Rhode Island had become a refuge for Quakers fleeing persecution in England and subsequently New England, many Friends finding a home among the much more tolerant Rhode Islanders. In the mid-1770s, the Second Great Awakening reached the New World, and Jemima began attending the evangelical New Light Baptist meetings, probably late in 1775, being punished by the Smithfield Friends for doing so in February of 1776. In May, her brothers Stephen and Jephthah had been shunned by the pacifist Quakers for engaging in military training, as well as their sister Patience for having an illegitimate child, and by August Jemima herself had left the Smithfield meeting entirely. That said, Jemima had become disenchanted with the New Lights by then as well, feeling great stress at being without a church of her own. In October, Jemima contracted typhus during a local epidemic of the lice-borne disease, remaining bedridden with a high fever and near death. Untreated typhus has a death rate of between 10 and 60% even today, with a local doctor giving a grim prognosis, leaving neighbors to maintain a death watch over her for several days until their fever broke. During this illness, Jemima had visions of her own death, and awoke as the Public Universal Friend, insisting that Jemima Wilkinson had died from the fever and been taken to heaven by 2 archangels, with God reviving Jemima's body and giving it over to a spirit they referred to themselves as the Public Universal Friend, having been given a mission to preach his message. In the Church of Friends, the Public Friend's role is that of a street preacher who would travel between communities and preach the tenets of the Quaker faith, a mission the Public Universal Friend would embark on following their recovery. The Friend, as they were more simply known, or PUF in writings, eschewed both sets of pronouns, preferring no pronouns, and chiding those that used feminine language with them, also dressing mostly in men's clothes, wearing long clerical robes, most of the time with cravats, and the wide-brim hat characteristic of Quaker holy men, replying when asked if they were a man or a woman with simply, "I am that I am." Though Rhode Island and the Quakers were in many ways more liberal, this sudden change was jarring to the neighborhood and attracted many locals who would question and debate the Friend, or just leave a snide remark after probably seeing what they chalked up to as an odd spectacle. The Friend preached many odd ideas for the time that we'll get into a little later, with few contemporaries, traveling around Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania with their brother Stephen and sisters Deborah, Elizabeth, Marcy, and Patience, who were the first members of the Society of Universal Friends, initially preaching an "end is nigh and fire and brimstone, repent sinners" message that was popular in revolutionary New England. The Friend seemed to have some cross-pollination with the Shakers, a sect of millenarian restorationists, originally known as the Shaking Quakers in their native North England, for their tendency to feel the Holy Spirit in a manner not dissimilar to modern Pentecostals, who first came to America seeking to establish their holy vision. The Shakers were imprisoned for 6 months in New York by colonial authorities for refusing to swear oaths of allegiance, which garnered them sympathy and converts, especially from many New Light Baptists, which, if you want to know more about the Shakers, I have a video about them, links up top and in the description. Whether the Public Universal Friend personally encountered any Shakers, I can't tell, but the Friend's message and the Shakers' mission were oddly aligned. The Friend would borrow meeting houses if they could, or more often than not, settled for open fields, a relatively common practice at the time, in which the Friend would preach their sermons not from a Bible but from memory, accruing a following of mostly young men and women under the age of 40. When the Friend did have a meeting house to borrow, it was more often than not from Free Friends, Quakers who, like the Friend and their siblings, were expelled from the Church of Friends primarily for their participation in the American Revolution. The Public Universal Friend recruited heavily from this community. The Public Universal Friend's trajectory and message would change after the May 19, 1780 event known as New England's Darkest Day, in which, from New Jersey to Maine, the daylight skies were darkened by a combination of cloud cover, dense fog, and thick smoke from Canadian wildfires, similar to, but much worse than what the Northeast saw in June of 2023. This event, which necessitated candles and lanterns at noon, was interpreted in many ways by many of the religious-minded Yankees. The Friend interpreting it as the end of the world was no longer nigh, and that it was time to start rebuilding civilization. All the saved were saved, and all the sinners would need the Public Universal Friend and their followers more now than ever. As the Friend gathered their flock, they drew heavy fire from Orthodox Quaker newspapers, primarily out of Philadelphia in the 1780s, though the papers usually settled on personal attacks rather than addressed the Friend's theological arguments. The Friend preached many progressive ideas that were on the very cutting edge at the time, really just the logical conclusion of Quaker beliefs that were honestly not too dissimilar to modern ideas. The Friend preached humility and hospitality, leaving meetings open and even feeding attendance. The Friend was anti-slavery and preached abolition, having several black members, with many serving as witnesses in each other's emancipation papers. The Friend, of course, had their own ideas about sex, sexuality, and relations between the sexes. Though the Friend discouraged marriage, they thought it was better for people to be married than have sex out of wedlock, with the majority of their followers being married to each other, but still maintaining a high number of single people, specifically women, among their followers. Later, in their settlement, the number of women-run households were much higher than the national average. The Friend also maintained very good relations with many Native American tribes, and was highly respected by particularly the Haudenosaunee peoples of modern western New York. The Friend and their flock assisting with the Treaty of Canandaigua as both translators and moderators, with the Public Universal Friend speaking to American officials and the Iroquois chiefs. The Friend and their followers began cultivating their relationship with the Haudenosaunee beginning in the mid-1780s after the Friends' growing following and unorthodox doctrine began attracting the wrong kind of attention, and it was decided the Friend and their flock needed to make their new society elsewhere, seeking to set up in the land of the Phelps and Gorham Purchase that encompassed the Haudenosaunee homeland in modern western New York. A vanguard of the Friends' followers established a town off the Genesee River to the west of Rochester in an area known as the Triangle Tract, with enough of the Friends' followers moving to the town that the Friends settlement, as it was known, was the largest non-native community in western New York at the time. The Friends lived peacefully for some time until a survey discrepancy, the difference between magnetic and true north, was discovered in the purchase, putting 25 homes and farms of the Friend settlement on property of the British land speculation company, the Pulteney Association, forcing the settlers to repurchase their homes at a premium because the settlers' home in the Gore, as it was known, were legally the property of the Pulteney Association and counted as improvements. Further land shenanigans would force the Friends off the Gore in 1799 to a property of two forward-thinking Friends between the Canandaigua and Seneca Lakes, establishing Jerusalem on the Quaker Lake outlet in the vicinity of the modern village of Penn Yan in Yates County. From the earliest days, what little property the Friend had was usually owned by someone else, with the real estate the Friend used held by the Society of Universal Friends in trust among its members. And this new Jerusalem settlement was no different, initially. Apparently, several of the Friends' followers had become disillusioned with the Friends' handling of the Gore situation, as well as developing theological and personal issues within the Friends' flock, and had begun working with other citizens of Ontario County, led by Judge William Potter, to have the Friend arrested for blasphemy. This culminated in several attempts to arrest the Friend, including a horseback chase in which the Friend outrode the posse, and 2 separate raids on the Friend's house. The first was foiled by the Friends' attendants, who tore the clothes off the posse as they were removed from the home. The second, a 30-man midnight raid, ended on the recommendations of a doctor brought by the posse, finding the Friend in no condition to stand trial. What may have motivated many in the area to try and depose the Public Universal Friend was the amount of land the Friend and their followers had in the area, which was rather quickly accruing value. The Quaker Lake outlet considered ideal for water-powered mills. Following the final raid, the Friend agreed to stand trial for blasphemy in front of a different judge, being cleared of all charges in June of 1800. The Friends' health would decline over the next 2 decades, delivering their last sermon at the funeral of their sister, Patience Potter, in April of 1819. The Public Universal Friend would pass away at 2:25 in the morning on July 1st of the same year, requesting no funeral but regular service, and, after a period of several years in a stone vault, was buried in an unmarked grave. The Society of Universal Friends began to fracture long before the Friends' death, and over the next 40 or so years slowly dwindled, the remaining followers battling over property rights primarily, but also petty status games and such. Most followers by the death of the Friend were themselves reaching middle age or older, and without their charismatic leader were unable to recruit, as Quakerism and its offshoots became much less popular in the 19th century. The descendants of the Friends' followers likely mixed into the general population or joined any of the other new and exciting cults cropping up in this time period, which was still the tail end of the Second Great Awakening. Jerusalem was solidly in the burned-over districts of western New York. Burned-over district referring to the religious fervor that spread like wildfire in the region, becoming hotbeds for just the same type of fire and brimstone preaching the Public Universal Fiend got their start with, resulting in the Mormons, the seances of the Fox Sisters, and the Oneida Society, among many others. Though I'd wager the land hunger drove most of the young further west, and their descendants simply forgot about the old prophet that carried their parents and grandparents out to the very fringes of the American frontier. The Society of Universal Friends dying out, literally of old age, in the 1860s. The life and rebirth of Jemima Wilkinson as the Public Universal Fiend is mired in legend and more often than not influenced by those with bias, both pro and against. Many contemporary sources were slanted to delegitimize the Fiend, the members of the Society of Universal Friends, and their teachings, or to favor someone later on in legal battles over land or status or whatever. Later, the women's suffrage movement would hold the Fiend up as a visionary, blazing the trail for women in society, while much later, the nascent LGBT movement would champion the Fiend as a queer icon, more recently claimed by members of the non-binary and transgender communities as among the first of their kind in American history. The truth of the Fiend is likely never to be known, but to me the Public Universal Fiend is one of the many strange and interesting characters that make America the strange and interesting place it is today. Thank you for watching or just listening. If you like this video, hitting the like button's a great way to show that, and subscribing to Mid-Atlantic Chronicles even better. If you have a topic about early American history you would like me to investigate, or just have something to say, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you again.